All right, let's look this morning at triggers for DDL changes. Now, one of the concerns about triggers is, remember that they do have effects on your database as far as they add transactional overhead. That is one of the many concerns. There are definitely other concerns, but let's look at where there are some use cases. And one of the use cases that actually came up recently was like pinpointing a specific time. Let's say you have a 20-minute window where you want to track the DDL changes, and let's say that you have some really specific information. Case in point, let's say you want to track like dropping tables. In this example, we're going to look at altering tables, but you're only going to be doing it for a period of time, so you have it isolated so that you have eyes on it and that you can prove out something. So in this example here, I'm not partial to leaving a trigger around, so of course definitely would drop it, and it's easy to automate where you create it and then drop it. So let's say you have a TSQL job that runs, so that your first step, you'll create the trigger, right? Then you'll run your job, it does what it needs to do, and then you'll close out your trigger. Again, this is usually if you're trying to track things. So in this case, of course, I create the table for tracking, and this is an example trigger where I'm going to create a DDL trigger where it is going to look for alter table, right? So any alter table command, it's going to track. I'm going to insert the date changed and the SQL text. And we know from the table that there's, of course, an identity field, but I'm not inserting into that because obviously that auto increments. Okay, and then I'm going to insert event data, and this is key here, where I'm looking at the actual command text that's executed. Okay, so in this example, what I want to do is I want to actually track what occurred. Okay, so then I'm going to make a table that I'm going to drop a bunch of columns on. And I drop 2 columns, and then I select from that table, right? And you'll see it says the date, and it says the alter table, right? And the command. So if that was something that I was confirming, or if let's say I was confirming, a drop table, then I would confirm that, right? The other thing too is at the end, then if you are going to drop that trigger, what you're going to do is you're going to drop the trigger on, drop trigger on the database, right? That's key, and it might throw you off. There is an error generated if you were to try to drop this like this. It'll say you cannot drop the trigger blah 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 because it does not exist or you don't have permission. Now I know some of y'all are like, well, because you just dropped it. Well, okay, let's create it and then let's run the drop trigger and watch what happens. You'll get that error, right? So you actually have to drop trigger on a database. So that also solves that error for you. So that can be very useful for certain contexts. Now, yes, triggers kind of, I don't want to say worry me, but I'm not a big fan of them because you have to realize that what's happening is if I make a change or I do something, all of a sudden I've created transactions, right? Well, imagine if, let's say, 100 tables in a couple of seconds change really fast. Well, there's a lot of transactions that are occurring on that table, right? So you're going to have some contention. And so that's part of the concern with triggers, is that it does add some, if you would, some overhead to your database. Not some, but it definitely adds some overhead to your database. So that's not a good or bad thing per se if you know that, if your database is okay with that. And then, of course, if you target that time, if you pinpoint to a specific time, even better. And it can be very useful for tracking what you need to know.